My mom sold my college fund to buy her new boyfriend a car. A shiny, black, ridiculously expensive sports car, and the worst part, she didn't even tell me. I found out when my first tuition payment bounced. That fund was everything. It was my future. My ticket out of this town and into a life I'd actually chosen. Without it, I was facing a mountain of debt, a dead-end job, and the crushing realization that the one person I trusted most in the world had just shattered my dreams for a man she'd known for 6 months. But it wasn't just about the car. As I started digging, I found a second transaction, a transfer to an offshore account, and the name on that account, it wasn't my mom's. And it wasn't her boyfriend's. It was a name I hadn't heard in over a decade, a name that was supposed to be dead. The car was just the beginning, the tip of an iceberg of lies, deceit, and a family secret so dark it was meant to stay buried forever. This wasn't just about a stolen college fund anymore. This was about uncovering the truth, no matter how ugly it got. But to understand how I got here, how I ended up in a battle against my own mother and a ghost from our past, I need to take you back to where it all began. My name is Alexandra Thompson, and for most of my life I was just Alex. A pretty normal kid living in a pretty normal house in a pretty normal town. My biggest concern was usually whether I'd ace my next calculus test or if I'd get into my dream school, the University of California, Berkeley. Yeah, Berkeley. That was the dream. I'd spent years poring over their course catalogs, imagining myself walking through those hallowed halls, debating philosophy in sun-drenched courtyards. It wasn't just a school, it was a symbol of everything I was working towards: independence, intellectual growth. A future that was distinctly mine. My mom, Sarah Thompson, was my biggest champion. She was a single parent and she'd worked incredibly hard to give me everything. She always said, "Alex, your education is the one thing no one can ever take away from you." And she meant it. Every birthday, every Christmas, a significant chunk of any money she received, it all went into the Alex's college fund account. It wasn't a huge, flashy sum, but it was steady, consistent, and growing. It was the bedrock of my future, a tangible representation of her love and sacrifice. I trusted her implicitly. She was my rock, my confidante, the person who understood me better than anyone else. Life felt secure, predictable in the best possible way. I had my friends, my studies, my part-time job at the local bookstore, saving up for textbooks and ramen. The college fund was this quiet, reassuring presence in the background, a promise whispered in the wind. It wasn't something I thought about daily, but it was always there, a safety net, a launch pad. It represented not just money, but years of careful planning, of shared dreams. It was our joint project, a testament to our bond. Then, about 6 months before my senior year of high school ended, Marcus Williams entered the picture. He was different. My mom had dated before, but it was always casual, never serious. Marcus was serious. He was charming, with a quick smile and an easy laugh. He drove a nice car, not the sports car yet, but a respectable sedan, and he always seemed to know the right thing to say. He'd bring my mom flowers, take her out to fancy dinners, and suddenly our quiet house was filled with a new kind of energy. My mom was glowing. She was happier than I'd seen her in years. And I, being a naive teenager who just wanted my mom to be happy, welcomed him. He seemed like a good guy. A little too good to be true, maybe, but I dismissed that as cynicism. I mean, who wouldn't want their mom to find love? Our house was a cozy, two-bedroom bungalow on the quieter side of town. It wasn't grand, but it was home. The walls were adorned with my childhood drawings, faded photos of family vacations, and a corkboard in the kitchen overflowing with college brochures and scholarship applications. Every evening after dinner, my mom and I would sit at the kitchen table, sometimes just talking about our day, sometimes going over my college essays. She'd make me her famous hot chocolate, and we'd dream about my future. We'd talk about the dorm room I'd have, the classes I'd take, the new friends I'd make. It was a ritual, a sacred time that reinforced the idea that my future was a shared endeavor, a joint investment. The college fund itself wasn't some secret offshore account. It was a 529 plan, set up years ago by my grandmother, Alina Thompson, who had always believed fiercely in the power of education. Every year on my birthday, she'd deposit a substantial sum, and my mom would add to it whenever she could. It was meticulously managed, with quarterly statements arriving in the mail, showing its steady, reassuring growth. It was a symbol of my grandmother's legacy, a promise from the past ensuring my future. It wasn't just my mom's responsibility, it was a family trust, a collective hope. Our town, Willow Creek, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. A sleepy, picturesque community where the biggest scandal was usually a zoning dispute or a particularly aggressive squirrel. It was safe, familiar, and frankly, a little stifling. That's why Berkeley felt so vital. It was my escape, my chance to experience something bigger, something more. The college fund was the key to unlocking that door. It wasn't just about tuition, it was about the freedom to choose, the ability to pursue knowledge without the crushing burden of debt. It was about fulfilling not just my dreams, but the dreams my grandmother and mother had for me. Marcus, however, brought a different kind of energy to Willow Creek. He was from out of town, a self-proclaimed entrepreneur with vague stories about past successes and future ventures. He seemed to have an endless supply of cash for dates, for gifts for my mom, for little luxuries that my mom, who had always been so frugal, suddenly seemed to embrace. I remember one evening he bought my mom a ridiculously expensive designer handbag. My mom, who usually carried a worn canvas tote, was beaming. I felt a flicker of unease. It wasn't like her to be so ostentatious. But again, I told myself she deserved to be spoiled. She'd worked hard her whole life. Why shouldn't she enjoy a little extravagance? The first real hint that something was off wasn't a dramatic revelation, but a quiet, unsettling moment. I was coming home from my part-time job, and as I approached the house, I heard hushed voices from inside. My mom and Marcus. Their tone was low, urgent. I caught snippets, just a temporary thing. No one needs to know. The car will solve everything. I froze. My hand was on the doorknob, but I hesitated. It felt like I was eavesdropping on something I shouldn't hear. I told myself it was probably just about a surprise party for me or some other innocent secret. I pushed the thought away, walked in, and pretended I hadn't heard a thing. They immediately changed the subject too quickly, too smoothly. That's when the first seed of doubt was planted. A few weeks later, Marcus showed up in a brand new car, not just a nice car, but a sleek, black, gleaming sports car, the kind you see in movies, not parked in front of a modest bungalow in Willow Creek. It was a Porsche 911, if I remember correctly. My jaw practically hit the floor. My mom was practically bouncing with excitement. "Isn't it beautiful, Alex?" she gushed, stroking the hood as if it were a pet. Marcus just grinned a little too broadly. "Just a little something I've been saving up for," he said, but his eyes darted to my mom, a silent communication passing between them. I asked, "How did you afford that, Marcus?" "That must have cost a fortune." He just laughed it off. "A man has his secrets, Alex." My mom quickly changed the subject, talking about how they were going for a drive to celebrate. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. It didn't add up. Marcus's entrepreneurial ventures never seemed to generate that kind of money. But I had no proof, just a gut feeling. The real hammer blow came a month later. It was early August, and I was preparing to send in my first tuition deposit for Berkeley. I logged into the 529 plan website, confident that the funds were there. I entered the amount, clicked submit, and waited for the confirmation. Instead, a red error message flashed across the screen: insufficient funds. My heart seized. I refreshed the page, the same message. I checked the balance, zero, a cold, hollow zero. My hands started to shake. This had to be a mistake, a glitch. I tried again and again, nothing. The college fund, my future, my grandmother's legacy, it was gone. Vanished. I didn't call the bank. I didn't call the 529 plan administrator. My first instinct, my only instinct, was to confront my mom. I found her in the living room, scrolling through her phone, a serene smile on her face. Marcus was out, probably driving around in his new toy. I held up my laptop, the screen displaying that horrifying insufficient funds message. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling, "what is this? Where's the money?" Her face went pale. The serene smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure panic. She stammered, "Alex, I can explain." "Explain what, Mom? Explain why my college fund is empty. Explain why my tuition payment just bounced." Explain why Marcus is driving a brand new Porsche when my future just disappeared. My voice rose with each question, fueled by a mixture of disbelief, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal. The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. She started to cry, tears streaming down her face. He promised, Alex, he promised he'd pay it back. He said it was just a temporary loan for a business opportunity and he needed it quickly. He said he'd double it, triple it. He said it was for our future, for all of us. Our future, I screamed, the full weight of her words hitting me. He bought a car, Mom. He bought a car with my college fund, my future. The one thing you always said no one could take away from me. She tried to hug me, but I recoiled. The smell of her perfume, usually comforting, now felt suffocating. I'm so sorry, baby, I messed up. I know I messed up. But her apologies felt hollow, drowned out by the roar of the Porsche's engine in my mind. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a choice. A choice that prioritized a man she barely knew over her own child's future. In that moment, something inside me hardened. The trust, the implicit faith I had in her shattered into a million pieces. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not my rock, but a stranger blinded by infatuation, capable of unimaginable betrayal. I walked away from her into my room and slammed the door. The tears came then, hot and furious, but they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of a dawning realization that I was truly alone in this. My future, which had always felt so secure, was now a blank canvas, and I had to paint it myself. There was no going back. This wasn't just a setback, it was a complete rerouting of my life. And I knew with a chilling certainty that I had to fight, not just for my college, but for myself. For the person I was meant to be, independent of the wreckage my mother had created. The journey had begun, whether I was ready or not. The next morning, still reeling from the confrontation, I tried to pick up the pieces. I called Berkeley's financial aid office, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. The woman on the other end was sympathetic, but firm. Without the tuition deposit, my acceptance was provisional. I had 2 weeks to secure the funds or my spot would be given to someone else. 2 weeks. It felt like an impossible deadline, but that wasn't the worst of it. As I hung up, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the 529 plan administrator, a notification about a recent transaction, not the withdrawal for Marcus's car, but something else. A small, recurring payment to a company I'd never heard of, a company called Phoenix Rising Investments, and beneath it a note linked to account of David Miller, a name that sent a shiver down my spine, a name I hadn't heard since I was a child, a name that belonged to my father who was supposed to be dead. This wasn't just about a stolen college fund anymore. This was about a ghost from my past, a secret my mother had kept for over a decade, and a web of deceit far more intricate than I could have ever imagined. My future wasn't just gone, it was entangled in a mystery that threatened to unravel my entire life. And I had 2 weeks to figure it out. The name on that email, the one linked to Phoenix Rising Investments, hit me like a physical blow. My father, David Miller, he died when I was 7, a car accident or so I'd been told. My mom had always been vague about the details, saying it was too painful to talk about. But now his name connected to a mysterious financial transaction after my college fund had been drained. It was too much of a coincidence. My immediate thought was, is he alive? Is this some elaborate scam? I started digging. First, I went through old boxes in the attic, looking for anything related to my dad. Old photos, letters, documents. I found his old wallet tucked away in a dusty shoebox. Inside, among expired credit cards and old receipts, was a business card, Phoenix Rising Investments, David Miller, senior partner. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a random company, it was his company, or at least it had been. The address on the card was an old office building downtown that had been vacant for years. My next stop was the internet. I searched for Phoenix Rising Investments and David Miller. What I found was a rabbit hole of defunct websites, vague news articles about a failed startup, and a few forum posts from disgruntled investors. The company had gone bankrupt years ago, amidst accusations of shady dealings and questionable investments. My father, it seemed, wasn't just a victim of an accident, He was involved in something far more complex, and the recurring payment from my college fund. It was a small monthly transfer, almost like a subscription fee, to a new entity with a similar name but registered in a different state and with a different owner. The owner's name was Marcus Williams, the same Marcus Williams who was now dating my mother and driving my college fund. I felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't just a coincidence. Marcus wasn't just some random charmer who had swept my mom off her feet. He was connected, he had targeted her. But why, and how did he know about my father's old company? Was he a former associate, a disgruntled investor, or something far more sinister? The charming facade he presented to my mom was a carefully constructed lie. He was a predator, and my mom and now I were his prey. The financial manipulation was far more extensive than I had initially imagined. This wasn't just about a car, it was about a legacy, a history, and a deliberate act of deception. I knew I couldn't face this alone. My mom was clearly compromised, still under Marcus's spell, or perhaps too ashamed to admit the truth. I needed someone I could trust, someone with a clear head. I thought of my Aunt Carol, my mom's older sister. She lived a few towns over, and while she and my mom had always had a strained relationship, Aunt Carol had always been fiercely protective of me. She was a no-nonsense kind of woman, a retired accountant, and she had a reputation for seeing through people's nonsense. I drove to her house that afternoon, the crumpled bank statement and my dad's old business card clutched in my hand. I laid it all out for her, the empty college fund, Marcus's new car, the Phoenix Rising connection, the recurring payments. Aunt Carol listened, her face growing grimmer with each detail. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes or try to comfort me. She just said, "That son of a—" I knew there was something off about that, Marcus. Your mother always falls for the wrong kind of man. She immediately sprang into action. She had contacts in the financial world, old colleagues and friends who knew how to trace money. She started making calls, her voice sharp and authoritative. She told me to gather every financial document I could find, old bank statements, tax returns, anything that had my mom's or my dad's name on it. She became my general and I her foot soldier. Her support was a lifeline, a tangible sign that I wasn't completely alone. But as Aunt Carol and I started to dig, Marcus's resistance became palpable. He seemed to know we were investigating. My mom started acting strangely, becoming defensive and secretive. She'd accuse me of trying to ruin her happiness, of being jealous of her relationship with Marcus. "He's a good man, Alex. You just don't want to see me happy," she'd cry, her eyes wide and pleading. It was classic gaslighting, and it was heartbreaking to see my mom, who had always been so strong, so easily manipulated. Then things escalated. My laptop, which contained all my research, suddenly crashed. Irrecoverably. My phone started receiving strange, anonymous calls and texts, just static or garbled messages. It felt like someone was watching, listening. Marcus was sending a message. He wasn't just charming, he was dangerous. He was actively trying to obstruct our investigation, and it was clear he had something significant to hide. The laptop crash was a major setback. All my meticulously organized notes, the screenshots of the Phoenix Rising websites, the forum posts gone. Aunt Carol tried to recover the data, but it was corrupted beyond repair. It felt like a deliberate act, a warning. We had to start from scratch, and now we knew we were being watched. The stakes had just been raised. We decided to go to the police. Aunt Carol, with her calm, authoritative demeanor, laid out the case: financial fraud, theft of a college fund, potential identity theft, and now harassment. The officer listened patiently, but his expression was skeptical. "This sounds like a family dispute, ma'am," he said, "and a civil matter. We can't just arrest someone based on a hunch and a crashed laptop." He suggested we get a lawyer, which ironically we couldn't afford given the circumstances. It was a dead end. The system, it seemed, wasn't designed for victims like us. My mom's emotional blackmail intensified. She'd call me sobbing, begging me to stop. "You're going to ruin us, Alex. Marcus will leave me. We'll have nothing." She even threatened to disown me, to cut me out of her life completely. It was a brutal tactic, playing on my deepest fears of losing her despite everything. It was a constant battle between my desire for justice and my lingering love for my mother. Every conversation was a minefield, every word a weapon. I was fighting not just Marcus, but also the person who was supposed to be my biggest supporter. Just when it felt like we were hitting every wall, Aunt Carol got a call. It was from an old colleague, a forensic accountant named Robert Henderson. He'd been looking into the Phoenix Rising Investments connection. He'd found something, not just a company, but a network. A shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands linked to a series of offshore accounts, and one of those accounts. It had a name attached to it, not Marcus's, not my mom's, but a name that made my blood run cold for an entirely different reason. A name that belonged to a prominent local politician, a man known for his anti-corruption campaigns. Senator James Thompson. Mr. Henderson said, "Alex, this isn't just about your college fund anymore. This goes much, much deeper. This is about money laundering, and your father, he wasn't just a partner in Phoenix Rising, he was the founder, and he didn't die in a car accident, he disappeared, and this politician, he was involved, he was the one who helped him vanish. My father wasn't dead, he was alive. And he was involved in something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The college fund was just a small piece of a much larger, darker puzzle. And now, I wasn't just fighting for my future. I was fighting to uncover the truth about my father and expose a powerful conspiracy that reached the highest levels of our community. The game had just changed, and I was in way over my head. The revelation about my father being alive and his connection to this powerful politician, Senator Thompson, shattered my world all over again. It wasn't just a stolen college fund, it was a decades-long lie, a conspiracy that reached into the very fabric of my family. Aunt Carol and Mr. Henderson, the forensic accountant, became my war counsel. We met in hushed tones, poring over documents, tracing the labyrinthine connections between Phoenix Rising Investments, the Cayman Islands Shell Corporation, and Senator Thompson's campaign finances. What we uncovered was a sophisticated money laundering operation. Phoenix Rising wasn't just a failed startup, it was a front. My father, David Miller, had been the architect of the scheme, using his financial acumen to funnel illicit funds through a network of shell companies. Senator Thompson, then a rising star in local politics, had provided the political cover, ensuring investigations were stifled and regulations bypassed. My father's death was a staged disappearance, a way to escape a collapsing empire and potentially looming legal repercussions. He'd faked his own death, leaving my mother and me to pick up the pieces while he vanished with a fortune. But the deepest mystery was my mother's role. Aunt Carol, ever the pragmatist, pressed me, "Alex, your mother had to know something. She was married to him. She managed the household finances." I wanted to believe she was an innocent victim, just like me, but the evidence was mounting. We found old bank statements, carefully hidden, showing large, unexplained deposits into her personal account around the time of my father's death. And then, the most damning piece of all, a series of encrypted emails between my mother and a burner account discussing the arrangement and Marcus's arrival. My mother wasn't just naive, she was complicit. She had known my father was alive. She had known about the money laundering, and she had actively facilitated Marcus's entry into our lives, knowing he was connected to this dark past. The discovery of my mother's complicity was a second, even more profound betrayal. The first had been about my college fund. This was about my entire childhood, my perception of my family, my very identity. The relationship with Aunt Carol, however, grew stronger. She became my anchor, my sounding board, and my fiercest advocate. She helped me process the emotional fallout, reminding me that my mother's choices were not a reflection of my worth. My mother, meanwhile, was spiraling. Marcus, sensing the net tightening, had become increasingly abusive, both emotionally and financially. He drained her accounts, maxed out her credit cards, and isolated her from her friends. She was a prisoner in her own home, trapped by her lies and her dependence on him. She'd call me desperate, sobbing, begging for money, for help. It was a cruel irony. The woman who had stolen my future was now begging for hers. I also found an unexpected source of solace in Liam Rodriguez, a classmate from my part-time job at the bookstore. He was studying computer science and had a knack for digital forensics. I cautiously confided in him, not the full story, but enough to explain I was dealing with a complex financial fraud. He offered to help, using his skills to recover some of the data from my crashed laptop and to trace Marcus's digital footprint. He was kind, empathetic, and offered a glimpse of a healthier, more supportive relationship. He became my quiet confidante, a safe harbor in the storm. Just as we were building a solid case, ready to go to the authorities with irrefutable evidence, disaster struck. Mr. Henderson, Aunt Carol's contact, was found dead. Ruled a heart attack, but Aunt Carol and I knew better. He was too close to exposing Senator Thompson and my father. His death was a clear message: back off. Then, a few days later, my house was ransacked. Not a typical break-in, nothing valuable was stolen. But my room was torn apart, my files scattered, and the few remaining physical documents related to my father's past were gone. It was a professional job, a clear intimidation tactic. They knew what we were looking for. They knew we were getting close. My mother, in a moment of terror, confessed everything. She admitted to knowing about my father's staged death, about the money laundering, and about Marcus's role as a handler, sent by my father to keep an eye on her and ensure her silence. She revealed that the college fund wasn't just used for Marcus's car. A significant portion had been siphoned off to a hidden account, a contingency fund for her, controlled by my father. She had been living a lie, a gilded cage, for years. Her confession was a desperate plea for help, but it also confirmed the full extent of her betrayal. I was at my lowest point. Mr. Henderson was dead, my home was violated. My mother, the person I had once idolized, was a willing participant in a decade-long deception. My father, the man I thought was dead, was a criminal mastermind, and Senator Thompson, the beacon of justice, was a corrupt puppet. The world I thought I knew had crumbled into dust. I felt utterly alone, overwhelmed by the weight of the secrets and the danger I was in. The dream of college, of a normal life, seemed like a distant, impossible fantasy. I considered giving up, disappearing, starting fresh somewhere no one knew my name. The emotional toll was immense, a crushing despair that threatened to consume me. I sat in the ruins of my room, surrounded by scattered papers and broken dreams. I picked up a faded photograph of my grandmother, her smile warm and reassuring. She had believed in me, in my future. She had built that college fund with love and hope. And now it was all gone, tainted by greed and betrayal. The symbolic loss of that photograph, a tangible link to a purer past, solidified my resolve. I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let their darkness extinguish the light my grandmother had tried to build for me. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about honoring her legacy and fighting for a future where truth and justice prevailed. The dark moment passed, replaced by a cold, burning resolve. I wasn't going to run. I was going to fight, and I wasn't going to fight alone. Aunt Carol, despite her grief for Mr. Henderson, was equally determined. Liam, my tech-savvy friend, became an invaluable asset, helping us set up secure communications and encrypted data storage. We also reached out to a few trusted journalists, investigative reporters known for their integrity and fearlessness. They were wary at first, but the sheer audacity of the story, coupled with the evidence we had, slowly won them over. Our strategy was multi-pronged. First, we needed to expose Marcus. Liam found a way to access Marcus's cloud storage, revealing a trove of incriminating documents, detailed ledgers of the money laundering operation, communications with my father, and even a confession from Marcus about his role in Mr. Henderson's accident. Second, we needed to expose Senator Thompson. The journalists began digging into his campaign finances, following the paper trail Mr. Henderson had started. Third, and most difficult, was my father. We knew he was alive, but his location was a mystery. Aunt Carol believed he was still pulling strings from the shadows, perhaps even orchestrating Marcus's actions. My mother was the wild card. Her confession, while painful, was also a potential key. We convinced her to cooperate, promising her protection and a chance at redemption, however slim. It was a calculated risk. Her testimony could either be our strongest weapon or our undoing. But I knew deep down that for her to truly break free from Marcus and my father's influence, she had to face the consequences of her actions. This wasn't about forgiveness yet, it was about justice. The climax unfolded on multiple fronts. The journalists, armed with Liam's recovered data and Aunt Carol's financial analysis, broke the story of Senator Thompson's corruption and his ties to the Phoenix Rising money laundering scheme. The public outcry was immediate and immense. Senator Thompson, caught off guard, tried to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. Marcus, cornered and desperate, attempted to flee, but Liam, using his tech skills, had tracked his movements. The police, now fully engaged thanks to the public pressure and the journalists' exposé, intercepted him at the airport. His arrest was swift and public, a satisfying moment of justice. He tried to bargain to implicate my mother and father, but his credibility was shot. My mother's confrontation with my father was the most painful. We had tracked him to a lavish villa in a remote country, living under an assumed identity. With the help of international authorities, he was apprehended. I was there with Aunt Carol when he was brought in. He looked older, tired, but still had that same manipulative glint in his eyes. He tried to charm his way out, to explain his actions, to justify his abandonment. But I wasn't a child anymore. I saw him for what he was, a coward, a con artist, a man who had sacrificed his family for greed. My mother, seeing him exposed, finally broke free. She testified against him, her voice trembling but firm, detailing his schemes and her forced complicity. It was a moment of profound release for her and a painful but necessary closure for me. With Marcus and my father apprehended and Senator Thompson facing impeachment, the full scope of the conspiracy was laid bare. The hidden asset, the contingency fund my father had set up for my mother, was discovered and seized by the authorities. It wasn't enough to fully replace my college fund, but it was a significant portion, a tangible victory. All the interconnected mysteries unraveled. The unseen hand was indeed my father, pulling strings from afar, using Marcus as his proxy. Sarah's complicity, while painful, was now understood in the context of her manipulation and fear. The true extent of Marcus's deception, his history of preying on vulnerable women, was exposed in court. Every thread, every question found its answer. I learned that my father had indeed faked his death to escape a massive federal investigation into Phoenix Rising, which was on the verge of collapse. Senator Thompson had helped him, not out of loyalty, but for a cut of the illicit profits. Marcus was a former associate of my father's, a small-time con artist who saw an opportunity to exploit my mother's vulnerability and gain access to her and eventually my college fund under my father's distant direction. The car was just a small part of a much larger, darker picture. The dust settled, the headlines faded, life slowly began to rebuild. I didn't go to Berkeley that year. Instead, I took a gap year, working full-time, saving every penny. The recovered funds, combined with scholarships I aggressively pursued, allowed me to enroll in a state university, closer to Aunt Carol, who had become my new family. It wasn't the dream I had initially envisioned, but it was a dream I had fought for, earned, and built with my own hands. My relationship with my mother remained complicated. She was undergoing therapy, trying to come to terms with her choices and her years of deception. We spoke cautiously, but the trust was shattered, perhaps irrevocably. I learned that forgiveness isn't always about forgetting, but about choosing not to let someone else's actions define your future. I learned invaluable lessons: the importance of financial literacy, the need to trust my instincts, and the absolute necessity of setting boundaries, even with family. I learned that betrayal can come from the most unexpected places, but so can support and strength. I was no longer the naive kid who believed in fairy tales. I was a survivor, a fighter, and a testament to the fact that even when your world collapses, you can rebuild it, stronger and more authentic than before. My story isn't a fairy tale ending, but it's a real one. It's a story about betrayal, yes, but also about resilience, about finding your voice, and about forging your own path when the one you thought you had disappears. It's about learning that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the biggest heartbreaks, and that in the end, your future is truly yours to claim. Looking back now, I realize that the college fund was never really about the money. It was about trust, about family, about the promises we make to each other and the devastating consequences when those promises are broken. But it was also about discovering my own strength, my own voice, and my own ability to fight for what I believed in. The car that cost my college fund ultimately gave me something far more valuable, the knowledge that I could survive anything and that my future was mine to build, no matter who tried to tear it down.